This is my review of Mob Psycho 100. Okay, so this episode is interesting because it's very plot heavy in this one. So we learn a bit more about the fact that there are more espers in the world of Mob Psycho 100, something that was implied with Teru in the last episode. But we realize that there are a lot more espers that we don't know about in the series. And we also learn a bit more about Onigawara as a character, and we learn that he's kind of a bit honorable, and that's a side of him that we don't often see. And we also learn a bit more about Ritsu and his resentment toward Mob. So, what happened is Ritsu wakes up in a cold sweat in the middle of the night, and he's looking into trying to get psychic powers, mainly because he remembers a conversation back from when he was a child about how he and Mob would had a chat about how he believed that he would one day have psychic powers because he's Mob's little brother, and several years later it still hasn't happened, so he's starting to get a little bit concerned. And people have started to tell him that he shouldn't be like his brother, so he's starting to question whether or not he should actually try to be a bit more ambitious. And that does come into play quite a little bit. Meanwhile, Mob, after watching Reagan assault a client out of self-defense because the guy kind of threatened Reagan with a knife during an exorcism, Mob tells him exactly what happened with the incident the other day, and Reagan points out that while it's kind of excessive what he did in quote-unquote self-defense, he points out that while he can use his powers in self-defense, he probably should be careful about the way he uses them. With that, Reagan sends Mob on his merry way. Meanwhile, Onigawara has been circulating a rumor about a shadow leader at Salt Middle School who beat up Teru and is trying to find him, and immediately suspects that somebody from the Body Improvement Club, which he subsequently winds up joining because he wants to learn more about the guy who wound up being the shadow leader of Salt Middle School. And it's Mob, obviously it's Mob, but nobody knows that at this point in the story. After promptly joining the Body Improvement Club, kind of sort of, he passes Mob with his cronies and apologizes, something that you wouldn't expect out of a thug like Onigawara, but here we are, because this entire series is about subverting your expectations of what you believe is going to happen. So yeah, it's a very surreal story, and it is kind of a touching moment, but it gets out of hand when Onigawara and his friends get into an argument and Mob winds up getting caught in the middle of it. Although Mob isn't exactly involved, it's just that Onigawara is just kind of very aggressive about apologizing to Mob. So, at which point Ritsu sees all this, and during his student council meeting, he talks to the president, a man named Shinji Kurome or something along those lines, about how he believes that the school is kind of not a safe place, and he wants to try and make it a safe place for his brother, who really doesn't want to hurt his soul. And obviously the target of that winds up being Onigawara. And on his way home, Ritsu is actually confronted by a man from a place called the Awakening Lab, who mistakes Ritsu for his brother Mob because they both have the same last name, Kageyama, and decides to attend, only to discover that it's in an apartment complex. And then, upon immediately confronting the guy who told him that it was indeed an Awakening Lab, finds out that it is indeed an Awakening Lab, and that he had converted the entire complex into the Awakening Lab. At which point we meet several new espers who have underwhelming abilities. First off, we meet Takeshi Hoshino, who has psychokinetic powers, but they're not very strong. He's able to bend a spoon with some effort, but that's about it. We also meet Go Asashi, who is able to use pyrokinesis, but isn't very strong at it either, and is kind of has the ability to use it as kind of a makeshift lighter, I guess. We also meet the Shiratori brothers, Daichi and Kaito, who have a psychic connection, which means that they can sense what the other brother's feeling. And while it isn't inherently useful as a power, it does enable them to sense when one is connected to the other. And finally is Rei Kurosaki, who has the ability to sense things with her clairvoyance, and she has a 65% success rate with it. And after realizing that they don't really have many powers, but have indeed begun to improve them, according to the group, decides to join them and help and try to learn how to use his psychic powers a little bit better and try to awaken his psychic powers. Something that he struggles with because he's been trying for so long on his own. And with his confidence restored, kind of, sort of, and trying to find out how to regain psychic powers, he goes into one of the classes only to discover that Shinji has been plotting. So it's established in this episode that Shinji's home life isn't exactly the most stable, and that his family basically hates him. So he decides to take his anger out on Onigawara by planting all of the reeds from the recorders, from all of the girl recorders, in Onigawara's desk. And Ritsu is convinced into helping because he just wants to help Mob in a better place. But we've established at this point that Onigawara, while a thug, is a bit honorable in that sense. Case in point, the next shot we see of him is of him in the Body Improvement Club and attempting to actually find out about the Seoul Middle School shadow leader. But he doesn't really mind all that much, because rather than get angry, which is what he would do if he was getting his time wasted, he decides instead, you know what, I'm going to honor my commitment. I'm going to train with this guy and see where it goes. At which point we also find out that he has a perfect attendance record, which is something that you wouldn't see a thug in normal circumstances actually doing. If he wasn't such an honorable person, any normal thug would just skip class and not care, but he shows up on time every single day for 2 years. At which point he's labeled as a pervert because the student council makes a play of finding all of the recorders in his desk and in his bag, and he's unable to come back from it, and is basically sent to the principal's office for it, and his perfect attendance record is destroyed. Something that he is incredibly heartbroken about. And after that, Ritsu begins to question whether or not he's on their side of good. And during one of his meetings at the Awakening Lab, he actually leaves in a fit of rage and goes home, where he runs into Reagan. And the two have a bit of a conversation about how Reagan is trying to find a ghost that's been milling around the area, and he wants Ritsu to help. But Ritsu points out that he doesn't have psychic powers and then leaves Reagan alone. And it's established that they don't have the best relationship, because Reagan is a con artist, as I said, and I'm pretty sure Ritsu is pretty much aware of that at this point. He's pretty aware of the fact that Reagan is a bit of a con artist and hasn't really been doing what he says he does. But something Ritsu doesn't realize until much later, and isn't even aware of, is that his psychic powers are indeed starting to work. And he inadvertently bends a spoon in his rage and didn't realize it, and finds out that Dimple is milling around his house. For how long, we don't know, but Dimple has just been there. So it's become evident that the Awakening Lab is indeed helping Ritsu with his psychic powers, as he's now starting to be able to use spirits and is able to bend spoons, at least subconsciously, without him realizing it. So it's clear that Ritsu now has psychic powers, and we learn a bit more about Onigawara. And during this, we do find out that there is indeed an adult Esper who becomes important later. But it's just like this little scene where Mob is trying to help Toru find more Espers to help her with her plan to reach aliens. And it's not a very major part of this episode, but it does happen. But yeah, this episode, as I said, is very plot heavy, and I did miss some things when I was going through my review of it, and it's kind of out of order, so you can but you can probably piece together what's going on here. But yeah, it's become evident that there are indeed adult espers in the area who are trying, and what they're doing becomes evident later. But yeah, there are adult espers in the area. There are other espers in the area, and it's clear that Ritsu is about to join the espers in the area and become an esper himself. So yeah, that's mainly what happened. Ritsu does some pretty despicable things in this episode, mainly because the club president, the student council president, tells him to, and he's struggling to figure out that he's not supposed to be doing that, and he's also struggling with emotionally because he's gone so long trying to develop his psychic powers to no avail, and now he's able to. So it's become quite evident that he is starting to kind of warp, at least internally, and is starting to break down emotionally. So he's starting to lose his resolve, I guess is the best way to put it. But yeah, if you guys have seen this episode of Mob Psycho 100, what'd you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Facebook and on Twitter in the description below. And also check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month, and it really helps me out, so I would definitely appreciate it if you did that. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace!